This week we're sort of backtracking a little bit, and we're looking again at nationalism in India and Southwest Asia. Now, we've discussed nationalism a lot. We've discussed nationalism in Germany, which ends up leading to Nazism. We discussed nationalism in Italy, which eventually leads to fascism. Now we're turning our eyes to nationalism in Asia. Our objectives this week: trace nationalism in India, summarize Gandhi's non-violent tactics, explain India's self-rule, and the last, describe the rise of independence in Southwest Asia. So as you can see, we will be focusing on India in this chapter, but we're also going to talk a little bit about Arabia, Persia, and Turkey as well. So in India, we have the growth of nationalism. And this is marked by two parties emerging. We have the Congress Party, which is mostly Hindus, and we have the Muslim League, which is, of course, mostly Muslims. And they want to be independent from Britain. So if we remember, India was sort of a colony of Britain. Now, one reason why nationalism starts to grow is because they're influenced by British culture. Many Indians are being Western educated in British schools, and therefore they're learning things about democracy, capitalism, and all these things. And they're bringing this back to India, and they start to spark sort of a national pride in India and a demand for independence from Britain. So after World War I, as I said, we're going back a bit, we have an increase in nationalist activity. Now, the reason why is that during World War I, many Indians actually are a part of serve as soldiers in World War I. And British promised that if Indians were to serve as soldiers in World War I, that they would start to make India self-governing. They will sort of step off the government in India. But after the war, Britain's promise is not complete. They do not sort of follow through with their claim of trying to make India independent. And this has sort of a growing resentment in India. And what this means is people are angry. They want to be independent. And the fact that Britain promised them independence and is taking it back after the war, it's going to make people mad. We have some radicals. They end up carrying out violence as a protest against what the British had done to Indians. And so the British, they end up passing what we call is the Rowlatt Acts. This is in 1919. Now, if you remember, World War I finished in 1919. And these laws that the British passed in India, they were supposed to sort of stop the protesting against the British colonization. This eventually leads to a massacre. As a reaction to the Rowlatt Acts that the British had passed, we have a protest. So in the spring of 1919, we have about 10,000 Hindus and Muslims. They gather at an area called Amritsar, which is in the Punjab region of India. Now, this alarms the British, and the reason it alarms the British is because Hindus and Muslims do not get along. So the fact that we have Hindus and Muslims protesting against the British makes the British a little nervous. It makes the British angry because with the Rowlatt Act, the British had actually banned any sort of public meeting place of a large group. So the military commander in Amritsar believed that the Indians, the Hindus and Muslims, were actually purposely going against this ban of public meetings. And so they react violently. Now, to be clear, the Hindus and Muslims who were gathering, they were not being violent. They were just protesting and demonstrating against the British. But the British troops, they end up firing on this unarmed crowd of 10,000 people. The firing only lasts for 10 minutes, but we have 400 people killed and over 1,200 people wounded at this sort of massacre. The British, they were not very smart when they did this. And the reason why is any Indian who was loyal to the British, have now become avid nationalists after this massacre has happened. So the news of this event, the Amritsar massacre, it basically sparks anger throughout India. And now they're demanding independence from Britain. After the Amritsar massacre, we have the development of one of India's strongest leaders, and that is Gandhi. And Gandhi, his tactics were actually nonviolent. He did not want to use violence to gain independence. So first of all, he emerges after the massacre, and he becomes the leader of the independent movement. So he is sort of the face of the nationalist movement in India. And what he's doing is he's blending a lot of different ideas, and many ideas from different religions. So he's not only taking things from Buddhism, Hinduism, and Islam, he's also taking things from Jainism and Christianity. And because of this, he's able to gain a lot of support from the Indian people. Now, the biggest thing that Mahatma Gandhi does is he encourages civil disobedience. What civil disobedience is basically do whatever you can to not cooperate with the British rule. And his party, the Congress Party, which is made up of mostly Hindus, in 1920, they back this idea. So they are encouraging everyone in India to basically make it hard for Britain to rule India. This is done in a non-violent way. So they're not saying go attack British. They're basically saying let's boycott anything the British does. Now, boycott, what that means is that up until this point, the British are actually selling a lot of their export goods to India, and they're forcing Indians to buy only British export goods. This is a way for the British to sort of gain money off of their own colonies. But what Gandhi does is he urges a boycott, which means no one should be buying anything that is British. The second thing that he's saying is no one should go to a British school, and no one should pay taxes to a British government or vote in a British election. All of these things end up being quite successful. So Indians are listening to Gandhi. And one example is that Gandhi would make his own cloth. So instead of buying British cloth, he would make his own cloth and would set an example for the rest of India. This nonviolence way of demonstrating, or civil disobedience, it actually takes a toll on the British economy. India is quite a large country. If a whole large country does not sort of buy into British goods, it's going to affect British themselves. They're having a hard time keeping trains open, keeping factories open, if no one's willing to really work for any sort of British gain. And even though many Gandhi sort of stressed nonviolence, we do have a lot of riots happening in India during this time. And many Indians, they end up being arrested and put in jail. Gandhi then sort of organizes a very peaceful protest called the Salt March. And this happens in 1930. Up until this point, the British had demanded that Indians only could buy salt from the government itself. And on top of that, they would tax that salt. So they're forcing Indians to buy salt from Britain, and they're taxing Indians for buying salt from Britain. So Gandhi and a group of followers, they end up walking 240 miles. And what they're doing is they're collecting seawater and they're letting it evaporate for salt. This was sort of an example of a peaceful protest. Again, there's not violence being used. But at one point, they arrive at where salt is being processed in India. And they were going again as a peaceful way, and end up being attacked. So we have these peaceful protesters are being attacked by the British again. But what ends up happening is there is an American journalist there, and he witnesses the attack during the Salt March. And this journalist ends up getting his story published worldwide. This sort of turns support so that everyone starts to support nationalism in India and is basically putting pressure on Britain to let go of India as a colony. Here's an example of the Salt March. So if you can imagine, this is quite a long distance that they are walking up India. In 1935, we have the Parliament passes the Government of India Act. What this does is it's giving India local self-government, and it's also giving some election reforms. But it doesn't really do much to calm this tension that always happens between Muslims and Hindus. Now we're going to look a little bit at nationalism in Turkey. Turkey is what is now the modern day country that used to be the Ottoman Empire. So after World War I, we see the Ottoman Empire has now collapsed, and we see the rise of Turkey as a country. And the Turkish, they often refer to the father of the country as Mustafa Kemal. Mustafa Kemal is a Turkish general who is able to fight off the Greeks. So in 1919, after World War I, Greeks threaten Turkey and say that they are going to invade them. Mustafa Kemal is able to successfully keep them out of Turkey. And after that, he's gained a lot of popularity in Turkey itself. And he ends up overthrowing the last Ottoman Sultan. Now, Ottoman Sultan, that would be like the king. In 1923, Kemal becomes the president of the Republic of Turkey. And he's able to do a lot of reforms in the Turkish government that make him quite a popular person and sort of sets Turkey apart from a lot of other Middle Eastern countries. First thing that he does is he splits the government from religion, and he modernizes Turkey. Now, if we think Turkey is an Islamic country, what he's doing is he's keeping government separate from the religion of Islam. He also is allowing more democratic ideals, such as women are allowed to vote. This would be quite a new thing in this area of the world. He's also taking a lot of notes from how Europe is run. And so he implements more Europeanized law and education. In Persia, we have a very similar thing happening to Turkey. Now, first of all, after World War I, Persia is, the British try to take over Persia. They're basically seeing Persia as a possibility of another colony. This ends up sparking a nationalist revolt. And the British are unsuccessful. They cannot take over Persia. In 1921, we have Reza Shah Pahlavi. He ends up taking power in Persia and changes the name to Iran, which is what it's called today. And he begins the process of modernization. Unlike Mustafa Kemal, who is able to promote more democratic ideals, we are seeing Reza Shah, he is using more of a dictatorship. And eventually he becomes very unpopular, as we have talked about last week. The last man we're going to talk about today is sort of the father of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is very different from Iran and Turkey. In 1932, we have this man, Al-Aziz ibn Saud. He ends up uniting Arabia as Saudi Arabia. And he actually names Saudi Arabia after his family, Saud. You can see the relation. But unlike Mustafa Kemal and Reza Shah in Iran, he keeps very, very strong ties to religion and government. And he keeps very traditional Islamic traditions. While he modernizes certain parts of life, generally there is no effort to bring democracy in this country, and he rules as a dictator. We start to see the rise of the importance of oil. We have the development of cars, and now oil becomes an important part of this. And many people are sort of exploiting this area of Southwest Asia. There's a lot of new foreign investment also coming in the 1920s and 30s. And the Western nations are trying to control this area, although unsuccessfully. Your questions. Tell me why the Salt March and nonviolence was so important to India, And please compare Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia.